everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and today I'd like to encourage you to read a book. And today's book is Stephen King's 11/22/63. I've got mine in hardcover, but I'm missing the dust jacket right now, so there's the title right there, 11/22/63. You know, it took me a while to remember the title of this, because I'm not a numbers guy, and I kept referring to it for a long time as that time travel book about the JFK assassination, and then I realized, oh, you can actually get away with that. I was like, Stephen King, you're really weird for naming it after the date, because I know that's a really important date in history, and a lot of people remember it. You know, it's like if you wrote a time travel book about, say, 9/11, you can call it 9/11/2001, I guess, but that would probably just be called 9/11. But this 11/22/63, I was like, I don't know that people go around saying that enough that you would necessarily remember it as the title of a book, and then, oh, it's almost sequential, 11/22/63. They're the ones I realized that I was able to remember. Anyway, this is already a TV miniseries. We're a couple episodes in on Hulu, and Hulu's not releasing it all at once like a lot of these streaming services do. They're putting it out once a week until it's over, which is kind of fun. They're doing it like a broadcast show, and I haven't started watching it yet because I wanted to talk about the book for you without having my viewpoint on it affected at all by the TV show. And of course, when you adapt something, it's somebody else's interpretation of the work, and this works wonderfully in the medium that it's in, and I kind of wanted to talk about it as a book, and that's kind of going to be the point of this series, is just like the one I do things on comics and movies and even video games, why is the narrative being told in this particular medium, and what is it using the medium to its furthest advantage? Why does it need to be a book as opposed to something else? And that's, of course, not to say that a thing can't be adapted, but then it very often becomes kind of a different thing, and that's why so often a movie or a TV show that's based on prose or a comic or something will have to go its own way somewhat and make some changes because it's a different medium. It has there are different devices. It can't do exactly the same things because it's a different sort of experience. And you know, when you read a book, everything's up to your own imagination, and you know, obviously, if you're detailed enough and if your descriptions are really good, most people will have a really similar picture, but my experience with this and how I view characters and places and things might be very different from what yours is. And of course, that's true too of movies and other visual media to a degree, in that your interpretation can be different, your read on it can be different, but we can't really argue about what a person looks like or anything like that. I could get a very different mental picture of Jake Epping in this than you might get. So anyway, this is a lengthy book. It's about 850 pages, but then part of that is an afterword, so it's more like 835, and it is a pretty quick read for how ginormous it is, and it is definitely, this is a cliche, but it's a page-turner, certainly. Don't let the premise fool you. It is definitely classic Stephen King suspense. It's not a horror thing per se. It's not trying to terrify so much as build suspense, and there are certainly sections that are really unnerving and that can, you know, get under your skin a little bit because a lot of this is about the dark side of humanity, about how people are in any time period capable of doing really awful things to each other for really selfish reasons or because of huge insecurities. So the idea here is you've got this English teacher, because Stephen King likes to write what he knows, and he gives this guy a really distinct, unique voice, and I totally buy everything about him and his vernacular and the way he talks about things, because he's an English teacher and Stephen King is an English guy, and it all feels very authentic. And anyway, he has a friend who owns and runs a restaurant, and this guy has found a time portal inside his restaurant, and this is used as a conceit with not a lot of explanation, which I think is actually really smart on Stephen King's part. And so basically the idea is time travel to a degree almost always has to be a conceit. If you spend too much time discussing how it works, sometimes your people are lost in the shuffle, and this is very character driven, and as Stephen King often does with a lot of his horror and science fiction concepts, he'll just put that in the background and have it be the device to get the ball rolling. It's kind of like superhero origin stories. Sometimes it doesn't really matter that we know the meticulous ins and outs of how a character got stretchy powers. Just put him in space, have him get hit by the cosmic rays, and go. And that's kind of what he does here, although toward the end there is some discussion about the rules, but we still never know exactly how these time portals got put there, or who put them there, who these what seemed to maybe be, even from the beginning, guardians of these holes. There's this guy who's the yellow card man, and he throughout the book, the color keeps changing. Sometimes he's the yellow card man, sometimes he's the black card man, which gets really ominous and makes you wonder what that's all about. And it's really creepy, the way your protagonist is talking about it. And it's this really mysterious figure that is, because of his close proximity to the time hole, seems to know something about the time travel, but never really tells you about it. And so he's that, admittedly, that's kind of an archetype. He's not a guide, he's not giving advice, he's not, you're playing right into his hands, he's not Cagliostro, he's not that guy. But a lot of these stories will kind of have that character who is standing in the background and clearly is in the know, and kind of sees the not the facade, but kind of sees what is really going on, while everybody else around him is unaware. But I think he does that to great effect. And Stephen King does a lot of that in this book, where he's using tropes and motifs that you're used to seeing in these things and kind of making them fresh again primarily by putting our protagonist front and center and making the book all about how these events and situations change him, as opposed to just making it about the plotting and about the culture at large. And where Stephen King always talks about how the plot is a crutch for lesser writers and people who don't really and Stephen King talks all the time, of course, about how plot is a crutch, and that stories should really be about characters. And that's definitely what he's doing here. So anyway, this guy goes into a time hole, and he comes out in 1958, and he's been asked by his friend Al, this guy who owns the restaurant, to finish his work, which is to stop the JFK assassination. This guy figured out that he can wait around for 5 years and do a lot of empirical research and spying on Lee Harvey Oswald and try to figure out everything he can about him, and primarily, of course, whether or not he acted alone, and then try to stop him and see if it really fixes a lot of things about the future. And he's concerned primarily at least at the beginning with like all the people who died in Vietnam and that kind of thing. Like, if only JFK hadn't gotten assassinated, maybe we could have averted some of that stuff. And one of my criticisms at the beginning of this is that Jake sees it, I think, too much as a foregone conclusion that this is something that should happen. He's not thinking enough, I don't think, and this is a problem with a lot of time travel things, although I think Stephen King kind of fixes it later a little bit. He addresses it, but it, in my opinion, kind of takes too long, where my first thought, and maybe this is just me, and maybe it's just because I've read a lot of time travel fiction and seen a lot of these things in the movies, but then this is a literature guy, and a guy who seems very in tune with he makes a lot of references. He talks about Ninja Turtles. There's just a lot of stuff he knows. So it's hard for me to buy that this guy wouldn't immediately think, okay, even if it is a better future, aren't I kind of playing God? What about the butterfly effect? And Stephen King talks a lot about butterfly effect, and he's very sophisticated about that. But wouldn't you think, well, what about all the people that might not be born because I changed the future? So yeah, there's all the people that died that I might be able to save, but then is it just a game of numbers? Is it, if I can save more than died in the first timeline, is this a better timeline? Aren't you wiping a lot of people off the board who just don't even get to be born, or taking great lives away from people who might go some other way or be forced into some awful unforeseen circumstances at the beginning of their life or something, just because you changed the future and they don't get the opportunities that they got in the first place? And of course you'd have some people that might have better ones, but like, who are you to decide that? Now the nice thing for Jake about this time portal is that he's able to reset it. So whenever he gets back into the present, and every time you come back to the present, you wind up 2 minutes after when you went into the first place. Whenever you come back, everything is however it would have changed as a result of what you did, but then you can go back in and it resets it right back to the way it was in the first place. And I like that a lot. It does a couple things. It gives us, the way the time travel in this works, gives us some good limitations. So you're not able to go back to any time at all. It doesn't make our protagonist overpowered. You're stuck in 1958 every time, so it gives you a power, but it takes one away. It makes it to where you can't go back to any time you want to, and that means that you have to worry about aging. And that's one of my favorite things about this book, is that we deal with the mortality of it, where time travel actually is a detriment to this guy, because he doesn't get to just go back and come back to the present like Marty McFly in Back to the Future, where maybe he's in the past, 1955, for like a week or a couple of days. But this guy, if he's going to try to stop the JFK assassination, he's going to age 5 years. And if it doesn't work, and he gets all the way up to 1963, and he's going to have to go back and do it again and age another 5 years. So you're losing years off your life. I like that it's just 2 minutes after you went in when you come back, because then you end up with all these, with potentially all these years off your life. And that's what happens to Al at the beginning of this, is that he's aged too many years in too a little amount of time. So there's a nice trade-off. And this book is all about actions and consequences, and I think Stephen King tries to make all of his books about that, where, yeah, you might be able to go back and change things, and maybe you're kind of playing God, but the trade-off is you don't get to live as long in the present as you usually would, and of course anything that happens to you in the past is gonna stick, because you're still moving linearly forward, and there's a lot of terrible things that happen to this guy that he's gonna have to live with no matter what happens in the future. So anyway, I'm not going to give too much more away about it because I want to encourage folks on this show to read things. That's kind of the primary point of this, is don't just wait for the, at least, if I think the book is good, don't just wait for the adaptation. Don't just watch the TV show or watch the movie, because again, that is somebody else's interpretation and it's a different thing. I like to go to Watchmen a lot, where I love Watchmen, the graphic novel, and I like the movie quite a bit, but they are also kind of different experiences, and they're about some of the same things, but as far as the mediums go, they're kind of about. They can also be a little bit about different things, because one is about how comics work and how we perceive time, and the movie can do that to a degree, but not to the same effect, because you can't make time move backward and forward as easily in a movie as you do in a comic, and so that book is using that medium to great effect, and it feels like it can only be there, and it's about the medium that it's being written in. So this book does that too with prose. I imagine when I watch the miniseries, it's going to be a very different experience, because I'm not reading journal entries, although it's certainly, or I say journal entry, this is written more like a memoir, but I suppose there could be a voiceover and it could still be that way, and tries to directly adapt this. I don't know, I've not watched it yet, and I may do a video on that when it's finished too. But what I really like about this is it feels almost meta, like it's I said authentic earlier. The character is really authentic in how he perceives the world and how he talks about things, and you buy his background. He feels like a real person, and he feels separate from Stephen King, although obviously the two men have some things in common. But but also the time period in the 50s and then the early 60s is really super authentic. You feel like you're really there. The research is incredible. It feels like Stephen King was there at the age he is now and documenting it. It's absolutely fantastic, which is part of the reason I really encourage people to read this and not just watch the miniseries, because it might nail that too, but the description of some of that stuff, especially like how food tastes better in the past, and like what pollution is like in certain places versus what it's like now, and a lot of the cultural references. One of the things I think he really nails too is the language and vernacular, how people speak then versus how we speak now, and Jake Epping trying really hard not to say anything that you wouldn't say back then, but not being able to always get that right, where he's always mindful of it, but occasionally he'll accidentally say something that we didn't say back in the 50s, and he's either not aware of it or it just slips out. So he makes those kinds of mistakes, and Stephen King is real careful to drop those things sometimes without calling attention to them, and then they come back and bite them later. The setup and payoffs with that are really good. So Stephen King could have really easily, if he'd wanted to, made this more of a stylistic universe, even in prose, and make it more of a heightened kind of thing, and he doesn't do that. He tries to make this as realistic as possible, and in his afterword, he talks about how he did a lot of research going to the different cities that are in this book. He spent a lot of time in Dallas, and he goes to at least one of the places where Lee Harvey Oswald lived, and was able to go and tour it and get visual reference. So when you're in that apartment, he's describing the actual apartment. He's not making that up, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. He does talk about some cheats that he made here and there, because it is a fiction, and it's sort of like adaptation. It's like adapting history to a story. It is still a fiction, but he tries to be as realistic and believable and have those real-life details as much as humanly possible. And that's not just a gimmick of, wouldn't it be fun to have that? It serves the story really well because he's trying to make it feel like this is happening in our world. And I really like that. And all the way to the very end, that works to wonderful effect. So I like that what we're reading is a memoir, and as the guy is writing it, we learn at one point early on that Jake has, his name is Jake Epping, he calls himself George Amberson in the past, and there's this part where he talks about two manuscripts that he's working on. One of them is a mystery novel because he's telling people that he is writing a novel, and he wants to actually have the novel to show people in case anybody ever asks. And then, of course, at one point he starts to get really into it and really enjoys it. And as the book goes on, his interest peaking and then waning on that novel happens parallel to how he's feeling about things, and as he's getting more into trying to learn about and then stop Oswald. And anyway, so he has that manuscript, and then he has this one. He actually tells us that he's writing the book that we're reading as the story is unfolding, and that's really neat because I feel like I can see the protagonist changing as he's writing his own story, and that's absolutely fantastic. So it's like writing it in the moment. I'm glad he didn't go all the way to making the whole thing in present tense. Just because, well, first of all, that wouldn't have worked within that framework, because it's not like he's documenting it as everything is happening. He's working on it later, and of course, he talks about it as, like it's a memoir, so he might be writing some of this, and you can't tell what parts necessarily he's already written when. He would be working on parts of this, as before all the events have happened that we're reading about. But then, of course, any book you're going to have, you're gonna make changes, and you're going to have revision. So, but that's the thing I liked a lot, and. Then toward the end, again, without giving too much away, there is a place where we actually catch up to where he is in the events, and he does start writing in present tense. Not the events as they're unfolding, but like, I'm sitting here right now, and soon I'm going to do this, and then it switches back to past tense, but it's really fun. It's like you're reading an artifact, and there's nothing that happens in this that would preclude the possibility that it actually really happened, and I love that. Of course, I've become something of a metafiction guy, and I'm not sure that I would straight up call this metafiction, but it has that component a little bit. It could work that way if you wanted to look at it like that, and I think that's really cool. The best thing about this is that it is a really solid love story. It's a really sad, tragic love story too, but the whole thing becomes a lot less about, and this is here, of course, what would happen if somebody stopped the JFK assassination, and it's a lot more about how the past changes this guy and the associations and relationships that he makes. Jake is incapable of seeing the past as just history books, especially because he's trying to change it. And as he's going through, he tries to stay detached and not get too close to anybody, but of course he's a human being and he has to live there for a long time, and he starts to build attachments. He starts to care about people, and we start to care about these people. And what's really interesting is that they change because of him. For example, he is at one point working at a school in the past, and we're talking like around 59, 60, I think, and he is working with, or 60, 61. Anyway, he's directing a play, and he ends up being the drama teacher, and there's this kid that he kind of grooms and realizes this incredible raw talent, and he is in a play of Mice and Men, which is, again, not to give too much away, but ends up being not an arbitrary choice. There's a in the story we're reading, there is maybe a bit of a parallel there with him and Oswald. Not that he and Oswald end up being like close buddies or anything, but he's humanized to a degree. Jake does start to see a little bit of where Oswald is coming from and who he is, but he also has this very monster side to him, and he's kind of always asking the question of how much of a real human being is this guy actually, which is all super interesting. But anyway, I just thought of that with the Mice and Men thing. But he grooms this kid, and you've got to wonder what his life was like in the other timeline, and if this kid is a football jock, if he ever would have had that in the other timeline, and where he went. And so these characters really come alive, and like I said, it stops being just, history that he is going back in time and looking at, and he becomes a part of it, and he gets to a point where he doesn't see 2011, which is, when the book was published and when this is set in, as his home anymore. And I also like that we discuss time periods as places in this, because if time travel were possible, you'd really think about it like that, and I like that a lot. Like I said, it's a really good love story. He falls in love with this teacher at the school, and of course, as you might expect, and again, doing some of the tropes that you usually see in a thing like this, but just handling them better and more character-driven than a lot of things would, he has to decide whether or not he's going to ever tell her that he's a time traveler, and whether she would even believe him. But she starts to, as time goes on, see that there's something really off about him, and he's keeping secrets from her, and she picks up on some of those weird colloquialisms and slangs and things, and at one point she drops a whole list of them on him, and I was really impressed with King at that point, where I was like, I didn't even notice some of those things, and they had actually some of them been in scene, and I liked that a lot. There are a lot of really vivid images and descriptions and ideas that stick with me. The broom is a big one, where one of the things they have in common are broken relationships that didn't work out because someone was kind of mentally abusive to them. And her ex-husband, they never consummated their marriage, and he always forced her to sleep with him with a broom running down between them. I guess that's something of a reveal, and maybe I shouldn't have given that away, but that's just a thing that will really stick with me. This idea that as a metaphor for keeping people at arm's length and not letting people in, when you get into sex, obviously kind of literally, but literally and physically, and that whole thing made me really see her as a real person and come to really care about her. I liked the dancing. I liked all the things that they have in common. He uses hobbies and job stuff to really make these people come alive, and by the end of it, of course, I'm really rooting for these two people to come together. I'll tell you, when I got to the end of the book, I more than teared up. This one had a profound impact on me. I've heard people say that the ending is kind of weak. Maybe on a second reading, I might have that experience. I really didn't this time, although I will say that, again, I'm not sure how I'm going to talk about this without spoiling too much, but this being as long of a book as it is, and this is a good thing, I was surprised by how simple the story was. I really expected that we would go back and forth between time periods a lot more often than we actually do, and that we really a big chunk of the book is spent chronicling those 4.5, 5 years that Jake is in the past looking at Oswald and trying to put his plans together and building this life for himself there. And I really expected it to be maybe a little bit plottier than that, although maybe I shouldn't with Stephen King. But the big selling point to try to get people to read this book, of course, is it's about the JFK assassination, and that happens later than I might have expected it to, and then dealing with the repercussions of it is, I don't want to say truncated, but not as much of the book as I thought it would be, and yet it totally works because that's not as much of the focal point of it. You have to do that. You have to go there, and again, actions and consequences. You have to see what would happen because of it. And at the end of the day, I think Jake certainly has to pay for a lot of his choices. And I managed to continue to see him being sympathetic even as he's being changed and more hardened, and does a couple of really kind of, morally ambiguous at best things that, you really got to play that with kid gloves if I'm supposed to really still care about him, and I always do, and I see why he makes choices he makes, and can appreciate them on at least a certain level, but one of them even I think really the big one, I think I might even, in that particular circumstance, potentially condone, but now I have to talk kind of cryptically because I don't want to give that away. So anyway, this is certainly a book that I would really recommend, whether you watch the miniseries or not. Like I said, it's really using the novel medium to its fullest advantage, and it's like reading a memoir, and that can't possibly be totally captured in a TV miniseries. So I really recommend reading this. I want to do more book reviews like this. I don't know how often they'll come out, certainly, but I'm trying to make myself read more because I haven't been lately, and I hate that. Narrative. The narrative world is where I come from. For those of you that don't know, I was in English creative writing major, and I've written a novel, and that's kind of what got me started in the reviewing game in the first place. And ironically, the thing that I did most in college and what got me in this is not something that I've done a lot of review on, and I really miss talking about the written word and language and stuff, and so that's something that I want to do more of down the road. So if you have any suggestions or requests of books that you'd like to see me tackle, either old or new, feel free to leave comments. I'm probably going to try to tackle more recent stuff, but I certainly might go back and review some older stuff as well. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Sure appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope some folks are up for some book reviewing. I may even try to let people know what the next one is that I'm gonna do before I get the video out, so that you can read it too. But I'm also gonna make these mostly non-spoiler, kind of minor spoiler, because I want to encourage people to read as much as I want to discuss and dissect these things. So I'll go ahead and tell you what the next one is. The next thing I'm going to review, I don't have it sitting in front of me. I'm reading right now a book, and this is nonfiction mostly, called Console Wars, which is, and it's another thick book, which is chronicling the Sega versus Super Nintendo years, and but it's interesting because it does it in the scene. I'm like 40 pages in. It does it in the scene, and it takes a bunch of interviews from people involved and kind of turns it into a literary biopic. It kind of reads like story, like a fictional narrative, and it even tells you at the beginning in a disclaimer that it has to cheat sometimes. So it is maybe like slightly fictitious. It's not written just like a biography, and I think that's really interesting, and I am enjoying it so far. So I will be, and that thing is incredibly detailed, so that's probably the next one that I'll be discussing as soon as I'm finished reading it. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Sure appreciate it. I'm Captain Logan, and happy reading.
Well, kids, that's all you get. That's it. Read a book!